Hi, this is Yvonne Prant, and I have a lesson for you today in type and layout. And we're going to use a newsletter that was created for seniors as an example of how to do the different things that I'll be talking about. First of all, this video is in response to an email request by an Effective Church Communication member who asked, what is the best way to send at least a monthly newsletter to an older congregation when some don't think it's worth the expense and others complain that we're not communicating with all our members, but only those that show up in a given week? Not everyone uses email or text because of the age of the congregation. We really have two questions going on here. The first one is really the spiritual one, where we might ask, how do you create both a paper communication and a digital one when you have limited time and a small audience? And second, the practical issues. How do you create a publication for an older audience? Well, let's tackle each of these one by one. First of all, on the spiritual side of it, the most important thing is to remember who you work for. You don't work for a secular ad agency. For a secular advertising agency, everything is all about efficiency. You find a core audience that you want to reach, you focus on them, you do what reaches them. You don't worry about the other people, maybe the smaller audience, the people that don't have a whole lot of money, the people that might not respond. You don't bother with any of them. But that's not who you work for. Instead, we always need to remember that we work for the shepherd who went after one sheep. You know, in the story where Jesus goes after that one little sheepy, I think, it probably wasn't a good little sheepy. It was a cantankerous, ornery, proud, self-involved, I'm going to do it my way sheepy. And then he got in trouble. But the shepherd went after that one sheep because that one sheep was important. We also work for the Father who waited for and threw a party for the one prodigal son. Maybe he had grandkids with his older son. We don't know what other relatives may have been involved in the family. He may have had all kinds of things going on in whatever business he had, but he waited for one son. That's who just consumed his heart, because that one son had needs. And then finally, we work for a coming king who takes personally the smallest acts of kindness and who will one day either reward or rebuke us for our actions before the hosts of heaven. What you are doing when you create things for the least of these, when you do newsletters, when you do all of the things that might take a tremendous amount of time and emotional energy, you're doing them for Jesus, and they have eternal consequences. Always remember that when you're making the practical decisions in your work. But then on the practical side of things, I do have a lot of tips that are going to help you. We'll illustrate these with a senior's newsletter. Now, let me just say, even though I said it's a newsletter for seniors, and I'm doing that because the initial question was about seniors, what works here in type choice and design applies really to all of your publications. The differences, though, what you might do specifically for a senior and what you might do for, say, a younger audience, I will point out some of those things. But the key process is the same really throughout. That is, first of all, you come up with your content. Your content remains the same through all of your production channels, whether you put it out in print, whether you put it out on the web. No matter how you do it, your content needs to remain the same. You create your paper version first. The reason I do this, it's really very simple, is Microsoft Word, I think, is one of the easiest things to create stuff in. Usually I'll create text and then I will put it, for example, into Microsoft Publisher and then on to the website. But it's a lot easier to move things around, I find, to spell check, all those kinds of things. Just I do them in paper first, do them in Word. Then after you've created that, you transfer it to the web, and when you put it on your website, you can either make a PDF out of it or you can just copy and paste your text. The one I'm going to show you is really easy to just copy and paste the whole thing, so you can do it either way. And then I strongly encourage you perhaps to get a team and make it a process to post to the different channels. What I mean by that is, for example, you have this senior newsletter. You get the information from different parts of the church, you put it together, then you have one person who perhaps will do the layout for the newsletter and another person who will put it on the web. you don't have to burden the same person with all of it if one person's really good, for example, with layout and paper, and another one's really good on websites. And that way the body of Christ can work together, can support each other, and nobody is excessively burdened with the different tasks. We do all of these different channels not to be cool or cutting edge or that's the end thing to do or whatever, but because people need it. We want to make it a core value to communicate to everyone, to help every member grow to full maturity in Jesus. As I talk about in this newsletter that I'm going to show you, remember Moses did not even start the most significant ministry of his life until he was 80 years old. It's very easy to write off people because of maybe their age or their abilities or their finances or all kinds of reasons, but we can't do that. We want to give everybody every message that they need, every ministry opportunity, every opportunity for growth, so that they can all become mature disciples of Jesus. Now, with all that background, let's now go to the newsletter itself. This is just a little mock-up newsletter that I designed for seniors. This is sort of the before, so don't think this is what I'm telling you to create. But I came up with a little nameplate. This is done in Microsoft Publisher. This is 2007, which is what I find most churches have. 2010 is very, very similar, but I'm using this because, again, many churches have this. Though the things that I'll teach you will apply across the board to just about anything that you'll be using. Okay, first of all, I did a little nameplate, Oasis Update. Oasis is the name of the group. I borrowed this name from one of the churches that I did a seminar in, and Oasis stands for our adult seniors in service. Service to God, service to others, and service to our world. Now, a lot of this is dummy text. Some of it is real content, but just to show you how you might start putting it together. Now, even just looking at it in this format, you can see it's really hard to read. You probably wouldn't want to read that. And two, we know that for seniors, because our eyes aren't as sharp as they used to be, it's harder to distinguish things. You want to be very careful about things like typeface. Now, I'm going to blow this up a little bit, and I'm just going to concentrate on some of the little details, and then I'll zoom out again. Okay, here we have this little section, encouragements from your pastor. Now, first of all, I want you to notice, I'm going to highlight this. I want you to notice that Arial is the typeface. I selected this because many studies show that your sans serif typefaces, such as Arial, that don't have the little squiggles and all on them, are much, much easier to read. Now, let me show you in contrast, a typeface like Times Roman. Now, this is still, Times Roman is considered a very legible typeface, but you can just see the contrast. The little serifs at the end, the little finishing things, they do make it a little bit harder to read, and especially when you're reading online. The nice, clear sans serif works incredibly well, so I'm going to change this back to Arial. Okay, now it looks nice and large because this is up close, but I'm going to zoom back out. As you can see, it's not very large. It's just 10 points. Now, what I'm going to do, and what I would recommend for doing for your senior newsletter, is that you bump it up to 12 points. That does make it a lot easier to read. Some places say 14 for seniors, but I think that makes it way too big. Let me just show you what 14 looks like. I just think it's too big. So let's go back down to 12, which is a nice, reasonable size. Now, the typeface alone and the size isn't the only thing that you want to be concerned about. There are two other things that are very, very important. One of them is the line spacing. That's the amount of space in between the lines of type. Now, the traditional term for this is leading, but in Microsoft Publisher and Microsoft Word, they call it line spacing. And they tend to, by default, do rather tight spacing. This is a lot harder to read because your eye needs a line of white space that you can track onto to go to the next line that you want to read. Now, what I recommend is that you change it in your text here, and that you make it, you go up to your format, you see you do this under the paragraph command, and then here's your line spacing command, and you do it between lines. Now it will immediately jump up to 1.25. I think that's a little too much. I like it just the 1.15. I'm going to click OK. And you see it's just aired it out a little bit. I think it looks a whole lot better and it's easier to read. Okay, we do that first. Now there's one other real problem with this layout. By the way, I'm doing a very simple layout, not a lot of extra clip art and cutesy little things. You really don't need that. If you have some pictures that you want to put in, that's one thing, but don't feel like you have to decorate stuff with clip art. People want information, and it's also much easier just to transfer something to the website if you just have clear, clean text. But there's a problem here, and that is how things go all the way across the page. Your eye tends to get tired about 2/3 of the way through a full 8.5 by 11 sheet, and you'll start to skip lines. And let me just again pull out a little bit. It just looks hard to read. The page, to me, it just doesn't look very attractive. It looks hard to read, difficult to read, whatever. So that's a real problem. Now there's one other thing, and then I'll show you the after and how I fixed them. The other one is down here at the bottom. Now let me go ahead and just get rid of the boundaries and guides. That isn't distracting, but see down here in the bottom where a lot of people, because websites do this now, they oftentimes have a footer that's darker and then they have additional text here. They'll make the bottom of, say, a newsletter or whatever darker. Now the thing that's bad about this is older eyes really need, and really everybody, but older eyes even more so, good contrast to be able to read things well. So we've got the lack of contrast here. We've got the text that goes all the way across the page. So how do we fix this? Well, let me just jump ahead now and show you the after of the newsletter, and then I'll tell you what I did to get there. Okay, here's the after of the newsletter. You see, it's so much easier to read. What I've done is I made it where the text is indented enough so that it only goes about 2/3 of the way across the page. Much, much easier for our eyes to read. Also, each of the paragraphs has just a slight indentation so you can see where they start. Now, what I did is, let me just show this to you so you can see the actual specifics on it. What I did, this is it's an indented paragraph, and it's Arial 12 point, the spacing 1.15. The first line is indented 0.3, and the left indents a full 2 inches from the edge of the page. Now, if you are a member of Effective Church Communications, I will make this template available for you. It really, it's one of my favorite layouts for very simple newsletters where you have your header. Your header is just a normal Arial 14-point bold and the regular line spacing. Then you have your text, and then your subheads, your pull quotes, normal Arial centered line spacing, etc. But anyway, all this will be available for you if you're a member. And down on the bottom I would have the church name, phone, email, website, social media links, all of these kinds of things, because this is something, a newsletter today is still a wonderful tool. People can give it to their friends, but you want to be sure that you have all the contact information on there because you never know where it's going to end up. And then here's the back side of it. Again, different opportunities, quotes, things for people to think about. So this is really a very simple newsletter. Now what's really neat about it too is to put it on the website, because I didn't do separate text blocks. I did it all as one solid piece of text. All you have to do is, see, you can just select all. You have the whole thing, copy it, then go over to your website, and you can use the little text box, paste in from Word. It does the same as from Publisher. Paste, insert it, and all of your materials right there. You can then, you put in the title Senior Newsletter for August or whatever it is. You can then just go through and make your headings and whatever else you want to do. And that's all there is to that. Very easy to just transfer all the text onto your website. You could also save it as a PDF if you want to make it available for members to just download and print off. And I would actually recommend doing both. Different people just like to read things in different formats. So basically that's just a few tips for doing up a newsletter for seniors. About the only thing I would change if I was doing it for a younger group, you might bring the text down a little bit. You might, for example, say you might go to maybe 11. Yeah, that would probably be okay for a younger audience. Very much smaller, it's just not going to, nobody's going to be happy with it, especially for something that you just want to read easily. So to summarize, it's really good to only have your lines of text go across 2/3 of the page for seniors, and really for many people to make it very easy to read. A sans serif text, Arial is something that's available on all systems, works out well. Increasing your line spacing just a little bit from 1 to 1.15 helps greatly in making it easier to read. Boxing something in instead of having a darker background, again, because it's a high contrast now, it makes it much easier to read. And the thing that we just need to remember on all of these things, yes, we want it to look good, and I do think it looks good. It's clean, it's clear, but the most important thing is that people read the content, that their lives are changed, and that they all become more mature disciples of Jesus. There's an article where I restate this on the Effective Church Communications website for everyone, and there is a template of the newsletter for Effective Church Communication members that has all of the type settings, the spacing, all that there for you. Just open it up and you can put your own content into it. So again, may the Lord greatly bless you as you serve Him today in church communications.